All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this session of our series, PeopleSoft Masters Series, a series of webinars that Gideon Tailor has been hosting over the past 6 months or so, each month focusing on a different topic in terms of helping organizations drive more value and more efficiency out of their PeopleSoft systems. Today's webinar is titled, Do Me a Favor, Open the Door and Let Them In, including external participants in PeopleSoft workflow. And I would pose the trivia question of what song we borrowed our title from, but unfortunately I don't know that you guys are actually able to participate unless you wanted to offer up a comment in the question.
They should be able to comment. Yeah, they should be able to post a comment.
Well, I will go ahead and give it away, even though there are probably a number of folks on the call that might be able to identify it. Let Him In by Paul McCartney and Wings. And it was sometime in the mid to late 70s. I think fantastic song. My name is Scott Anton with Gideon Tailor. I manage business development. And on the call with us and our primary speaker this afternoon is Paul Tailor, President and CEO of Gideon Tailor. And welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
A little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this afternoon, and each one of you will get a link to the recording following the webinar. You should see that in your email within the next day or two. If you have any questions as we go along, please use the Q&A tool down at the bottom of your screen to pose those. We're more than happy to take a pause from what we're talking about and respond to those. We might choose to hold on to some of those until the end of the session. We are planning to allow for some time for Q&A at the close. So it's entirely up to you. Feel free to submit those as we go along, or you can certainly wait until the end. We've got a couple of other webinars scheduled over the course of the next couple of months, and we encourage you to join us for those. May 12th is PeopleSoft Visualized, getting the big picture with pivot grids, analytics, and Kibana. And on June 16th, we're hosting a guide to building custom forms with delivered 9.2 tools. That particular webinar is going to focus on how to create intelligent dynamic forms using delivered 9.2 tools, things like fluid approvals, activity guides, page composer, and a number of other tools to allow you to create powerful, intelligent, integrated self-service applications inside PeopleSoft. Oops. In terms of a little bit of background, if you're not familiar with Gideon Tailor, we've been working with PeopleSoft since 2001 as a PeopleSoft consultancy. And some of our consultants on staff actually have a longer history with PeopleSoft than that. Since 2003, we've really focused our efforts on helping organizations drive more value from their PeopleSoft systems through custom automation, effective, efficient, powerful custom automation inside PeopleSoft. So our focus is helping organizations revolutionize business processes. And we do that through a variety of different methods as well as technologies. And our vision is to help our clients work simply, effectively, efficiently, and flexibly. There are a few logos on this slide that I like to point out. The largest one being we're an Oracle Gold partner and have been for many years. The two smaller ones signify our Oracle validated integration with our GTE Forms tool for PeopleSoft.
And I would like to point out, oops, sorry. Go ahead, finish. I'm just going to point out that I'm the guy stroking his chin thoughtfully there, if you wondered who that was a picture of.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. GTE Forms, I will note, is the only form builder that is certified for PeopleSoft by Oracle. And we will be talking about that a little bit during the call today. In addition to our own GTE Forms tool to enable organizations to build out these powerful, dynamic, custom self-service applications inside PeopleSoft, we're also specialists in a wide variety of tools and technologies that PeopleSoft delivers. And those include things like activity guides and guided self-service, page and field configurator, drop zones. And we've actually had sessions on those over the last few months. You guys may have joined those webinars as well. PeopleSoft Forms and Approval Builder, and custom development with approval framework. So if you have any questions on any of those areas, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to lend our guidance and our help where we can. This is what we lovingly refer to as our NASCAR slide. There are a lot of organizations that we've had the pleasure of working with over the years. These are just a handful of those that have called upon us to help them with custom automation inside their PeopleSoft applications, whether that's PeopleSoft HCM, Financials, or Campus Solutions. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Paul. Paul, you can take it away.
Thank you. So here's just a brief agenda of what we'll be going through. Our main discussion point again is including external participants. And this session is not a comprehensive review of all the many ways that you can include them, but it's an illustration of one approach where we've used some of our recent technology, including a token authentication framework, a configure token framework inside of GTE Forms to enable external participation. So we're happy to talk about other ways to do it. This is one approach, and hopefully it'll open our minds to what's possible. So we'll start off with a brief history of business systems. And we paid a graphic designer a lot of money to build this upcoming illustration, so I hope you appreciate it. So in the beginning, there were core systems. And the core systems were only used by core users. And of course, those core users needed to be heavily authenticated because the core system is what holds all of the most important data in large amounts for the whole enterprise. So and to begin with, back in the Stone Age, that was all that the system really had. Then we came along and said, wouldn't it be cool if we could extend PeopleSoft, or the business system, to include the constituents of the system? So employees, students, other people that are involved in the organization, but who are not core system users. So we have this era where we were rolling out self-service, and the question was with PeopleSoft, well, have you implemented self-service yet? Have you taken that big leap to give user IDs instead of to 100 people in the core system to a few thousand people who are constituent users? But then we have yet another layer that gets added, and that is the public. So for example, in PeopleSoft HCM, you have Candidate Gateway, or eRecruit, that was added. And here you wanted people to come in and apply for jobs, for example, without having to have a user ID created for them. And so you created this public space, which is still PeopleSoft, but which extends PeopleSoft content to include the public. And we're going to be talking about all three of these layers. I do just want to point out that all three of these layers are standard practice for PeopleSoft applications, and it is standard to extend some content to the public. It's standard to have an authenticated layer where people can get at stuff that pertains just to them, but not at the core system. And there's value in having all of those layers tied into the core system so that we can actually integrate all the information together and give core users access to the transactions that have taken place in the other layers. So I hope all that money we paid the graphic designers was worth it. So here are some objectives for involving external participants. If you get electronic signatures on electronic forms, You have a clear path of identity and transaction ownership. You have greater assurance of who did what. There's no paper to shuffle. You want to get rid of manual administrative tasks, and you want to get rid of manual security tasks. You don't want a security person to be having to set up access for these external participants. You would like to be able to complete AWE transactions or approval framework. You want to end up with queryable data in PeopleSoft. And in some cases, you'll want ongoing access for authorized external participants. You want them to be able to continue to get into the system to participate in those transactions. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. You have the holy grail of being able to have someone who's outside the system sign a form. We know who they are, and it's a valid legal signature, electronic signature, and the form has never gone to paper, and we can query the results, and it happened in a fully automated way. So that's what we're going to try to accomplish here. But there are some problems, as there always are, some roadblocks. Those include that PeopleSoft workflow, approval framework, or AWE, is based on user ID. So the signatures and the routing are all based on having a user ID, and external participants, by definition, don't have user IDs. Setting up user IDs takes lots of manual effort from administrative staff, and you have the concern from security people, won't giving user IDs to external participants expose our core system data? Do we really want these people who are not even employees fiddling around in our PeopleSoft system? Do we really want to give them IDs? So with those concerns in mind, here is a solution. Tokens. So a token acts as an invitation to participate in a specific transaction. You can send an external participant a token which authorizes them to act on one particular transaction without giving them any more access. What we're going to walk through, this particular approach, lets them create their own self-service user ID, and then the token knows where they need to go in order to complete the transaction that they've been invited to participate in. So it takes them to the eForm that they need to sign. They can sign it using their own user ID, and then that user ID can also be persistent and continue to give them ongoing access to the transactions they have tokens for. So they could go in, if the token gave, for example, we'll be talking about a parental access solution here, using that as a case study and a demo. You might want that parent to be able to get in and look at their students' information in the future. That parent may have multiple students, and instead of them having to have multiple IDs as the delivered PeopleSoft parent access process creates, this approach means that they can have one ID and they can be granted access to multiple students and still only be able to see their own students that they have tokens that let them access the data. So then, what is a token? Here's one. It isn't really a Bitcoin, but Bitcoin actually is a pretty good analogy, because it is a token, as we're talking about it here, is a long unique identifier, and it's also known as a UUID, or a GUID, a global universal ID, or unique ID, global unique ID, or universal unique ID. They're long enough that it's infeasible to try to crack them. try to randomly generate things to try to get into it. It's just not worth doing that. A token can then be associated inside of the secure PeopleSoft system with anything, whether that's an eForm based transaction, whether it's a set of data fields, whether it's a user ID or an EMPL ID or whatever. You can tie that token to other data, and then you can send out the token out into the world, and so you can attach it to an email link, for example, put it in an email, send it out, and you know when you get it back what information that token is referencing, but you haven't actually sent the private data out there. So rather than appending an EMPL ID or an SSN or something else scary to the end of the URL in an email link and sending it out into the world where it'll never go away, you've sent this token out there. Your system inside your firewall knows what data that token represents, but nothing outside of your firewall knows that. The token can be used to get access to the private data, but you can also set that token so that it expires. That closes the window for potential bad actors to get at data through the token. So you keep a very narrow window of when the token can be appropriately used. Okay, so on to our case study, getting a parent signature on a student's form. This is only one of many situations where you might want to involve an external participant in workflow. Other ones include onboarding, where perhaps you want to invite a new candidate who's going to be onboarding as an employee to, you want to invite them to begin the onboarding process before they've been hired. So you can send them a token that gives them access to an onboarding activity guide and that allows them to self-provision to be able to fill out their onboarding paperwork. It could be vendor onboarding. There are a number of places where you can involve external participants in specific transactions. Actually, never did build that slide, so we'll skip right ahead. Here is a demo. So here I am as a student. And I'm going, whoops, I need to hit this other keystroke deposit. So the student is going to set up parent access to complete a form that they're going to start here. So the student will go ahead and start the form. It pre-populates. This is a GTE form if you're not familiar with our products. It was built without technical work to put the fields on the page. You'll see it pre-populates with the student's information, and then the student is asked to fill in parent information. There's some fields that are frequently asked for on financial aid forms. So here we're putting the parent's SSN. We don't really want to send that information out into the wild, but we need to be able to check against it. Now, just for an extra little example of another layer of security you can add here, we've added a passphrase that the student is going to attach to this. So we're going to send an email to the email address that has been entered here, and that email is going to have the token that's going to give them access to come in and finish their portion of the form. If you want to add that a second authentication factor in addition to the email address, you can add this passphrase, and here in a moment we'll ask the student to give that passphrase to their parent in some other fashion other than email. So we'll say, yeah, just contact them and give them the passphrase. And we're also asking them to check their email right away because this access link expires in 6 hours. And now we have routed the form onto a user that doesn't exist yet. So we've just routed to a placeholder guest account while we wait for the parent to do what they're going to do. So now we've finished the student portion. Now the parent, we'll flip over here, has received an email. It's not really from John, but we're saying your signature has been requested. We'll flip this sideways here. For this student, click here to create your electronic signature to access the student account. So that link is only valid for 6 hours. And that link has that token in it. So when we click the link, it will then take us into the public layer of PeopleSoft and allow them, it'll pre-populate with their information, and it can do that because we pass that token back in, and the token is associated with the form, and the form has this information on it. But we're going to have them enter the passphrase. We could also have them, we would probably have them set up their own password here if we want them to be able to get back in at another time. They can set up their own password. But by doing this guest access approach, we've identified who they are. We can even go to another level and interact with an identity service provider like GACT, who we partner with, and we can ask all those fun, intrusive questions like, which of the following is your home mortgage amount, your monthly mortgage amount, or which of these addresses have you lived at in the past 10 years? Or which of these products do you use to deflea your pets? We can get access to the information in their credit reports, their public credit reports, and then use that to identify them based on the Social Security number that was provided by the student. And in this case, we're just going to have them enter the passphrase. So they will put in Tiny Dancer and then proceed. The token is validated, and it gives them access then to click this Sign Student Form as Parent. When they click that, they are now into the next layer. They're now in the self-service layer, and they have their own user ID. They can see the form, and they can see a parent-only section of the form where they can add additional information. And then once they have done their bit, they can sign by hitting that acknowledgement and by resubmitting that they're attesting that they're affixing their electronic signature, and they resubmit this. It has then routed on. We've collected their signature. We have generated a user ID for them. In this case, their user ID is Frivolous Clock 1, whereas the student was GTC. And so they have successfully participated in an approval process. Okay, so first off, let me just pause, see if there are any questions in the queue. Scott, do we have any questions at this point?
Not yet.
Great, then I will plow on. So part of what the solution is based on is a public portal strategy. Like I said, the public portal is a delivered best practices process that PeopleSoft creates and delivers products that rely on public portals. But we can also leverage that public portal layer to accomplish our own designs. Of course, security is the most important thing when it comes to extending PeopleSoft content. You want to be able to provide public content and open doors for the public to participate in business processes without exposing any secure information publicly. You also don't want to end up opening a back door around authentication protocols for authorized users. So you may have for your core systems a two-factor authentication scheme set up that requires them to take an extra step to get through into the core system. And you don't want, by opening a public portal, to give your core users a way to circumvent that, to get to their secure content that they are authorized to get to, but allow them to get to it without going through the authentication protocols you've set up. You don't want to end up mixing content between your secure and your public domains, and so you don't want to mix the permissions between those. And you don't want to end up creating a security management headache for the people who take good care of us and make sure that everything is safe and secure in our PeopleSoft systems. So a public portal helps to accomplish all of those things. You can present PeopleSoft content without requiring authentication to reach it. That lets you engage with user populations who don't have authentication. Again, that can include applicants, candidates, vendors, suppliers, parents. And you can allow business process workflow to include those non-authenticated users. The public portal is a necessary piece of the solution. Obviously, it's not a sufficient piece in and of itself or by itself. You need the other pieces that we've talked about. But I did want to spend just a minute on the public portal. One of the ways that you accomplish those goals of a public portal is by changing or adding to the URL. So you have in PeopleSoft, you have most of your content hosted, for example, in HCM, is hosted under the employee portal, under the HRMS node. And I know that all this stuff is stuff that most of us just ignore when we're working with PeopleSoft, but it's kind of happening up on the top of the screen. The employee and HRMS and employee portal is where you get access to these core systems. Most of the pieces of the URL can be customized, and by creating different pieces, extensions of these, you can separate your public content and even your self-service content from your core content, so that even if you are extending, for example, some content out to the public outside of your firewall, you don't have to give any access to, you can set up big, huge barriers so that not only do they need a password to get to the core information that they're not supposed to get to, it's not even served by that web server. So to create this complete separation, you end up building a new menu and permission list and role that only is granted to the guest user. You create a new portal, and that allows you to basically only publish the content on that portal, on the public portal that you want them to see. The node restricts where that content can display. You can actually set up a new web profile that that lets you control how you get access, so that you can give access to that guest content in ways that you don't give access to anyone else. And by putting it on a whole different domain and site and port, you basically said, this is a whole different server, and there's no way using even this physical IP address, there's no way to get to the core information that I'm keeping safe behind my firewall. So that allows you to completely isolate your public traffic from your secure traffic. And if that's all too technical, the point is you can do this securely. And PeopleSoft does it securely all the time. And so it's not an uncommon thing to do, and it can be done successfully and securely. Okay, so look then behind the scenes a little bit to see how we've set this up. One of the main pieces of the solution is the token. So in GTE Forms 3.30, our new release, we have added this this new setup feature for tokens, to configure tokens. So if we go in here for our parental access solution, we actually involved 2 tokens. And even though it looked straightforward to the participants, there was a lot of complexity happening behind the scenes. So the first one that we're concerned with is the access provisioning form token. So a token knows a number of things. First, it knows how long it can live. So this one is set to expire after 6 hours. You can set it up to last for years or for minutes. This one is there for 6 hours. It also knows where it's going. So we've embedded navigation into it so that when you process this token, it knows where to go. You can also attach data to it. So these fields can all be populated for this token, and there is a separate table that stores token data. So you can join against that table, you can query against that table, and we can set up whether this is required information. You can also set up whether the token gets added to generated URLs so that it brings it back into the system. You can also add specific pieces of data to the URL if you want to use them to navigate around. Typically, you don't do that for external facing tokens like this one. The only thing that's added to the URL is the token itself. So that's the first token that got used that got sent to the parent in their email link. And then there is another token that actually got generated when they self-provisioned, and that was to give them ongoing access to the student's information. So this one expires after 2,000 days, and it points somewhere else. And this one actually includes the form ID that they have access to sign, and adds to this link the URL, so the eForm ID, so that it will take them to that specific form that they have access to navigate to. The EMPL ID in this case is the student's ID. So we now know this parent, if they have this token associated with their own new user ID, it gives them access to this EMPL ID and only that one, and to this form ID. So we can then use it to say in the search record, okay, what students can you see? Well, you only have a token that gives you access to this student. So that's the only student you can see. And we can restrict it down to either to say you can see everything for that student, or you can only see this one transaction that that student gave you access to see. So the using that setup and the pieces of technology behind it, we can provide very controlled access to specific transactions within PeopleSoft. Okay, so back to the high-priced graphics designer. Let's just walk through again, illustrated in an illustration, how this happened. First, again, we've got our 3 layers. So we have our core layer, and then we've got our self-service layer where people can see just the transactions that they're involved in. And then we've got the public layer that faces toward the outside. In this case, we've also involved the parent's inbox. So we start the process by a student creating the form in their self-service area. So they've filled out the form, and when they fill out the form, we automatically generate this token. And the token then gets passed to the parent in their email as part of a link. When they click that link, well, let's move the token up there into the email. So when they click that link, it's going to take them to the public space, and it's going to take them specifically to a public token listener that's just there to receive tokens and then decide what to do with them. First to validate them, and then based on what navigation the token has, to take it someplace. In this case, the token is set up to go to another place on the public portal, but it's a place that you can only get to if you have the right token, and if that token lets you navigate there. So the token itself knows how to get to the self-provisioning page, but it has to be validated first. So after the public token listener validates the token and makes sure that it hasn't expired, it actually can look to see where that token is supposed to go and take the user to that place, to self-provisioning. If you tried to access the URL for the self-provisioning page and you didn't have a valid token that points there, you would get an error and you wouldn't be able to access it, even though it's in the public space. So it's creating a bridge between public and self-service. Even though it's in the public space, it is authenticated, the user experience is authenticated by that token. So then you saw what happened is after they filled out the form in that public space, they actually ended up having a user ID generated for them. So the parent ended up with a generated self-service user ID, and a new token was created for them. This is their long-lasting token that can give them access to come back and see the student data after they completed this transaction. At this point, we no longer need the other token. It is gone. And now we've established their presence as a self-service user and no longer need the public aspect of that. So now they are then, with the token in hand or on their URL, they can now actually get access to the eForm that the student invited them to participate in, and that token allows them to sign it. So now that they have signed that form, it can route and be accessible to the core users who need to query it, who need to review it, and it could even go and update various other aspects of the PeopleSoft system. So again, the token ends up being both the authentication for for the participants in the process, but it's also the navigation, and it's also the key to the data that's stored along with it. So it provides a lot of value throughout this process. And so a couple of last points. First off, there's a lot to this. And we showed you just a little more detail. Here's an even deeper dive, and you're not supposed to be able to digest this. We're just throwing it up here to show how hard it was, how much work we did to make this happen. We've got framework pieces over here, and we have some other PeopleSoft technology, and then a lot of stuff that we wrote in order to implement that, to leverage the token functionality in various places, to generate tokens, to publish tokens, to add information into those tokens, to generate additional tokens, and add various edits in various places. But all of this is leveraging information and leveraging technology that we have added to version 3.3 of GTE Forms. The creation of the auto creation of a parent ID is using another piece of technology that's in our eForms library called demo thread tool, which you can also, if you're a GTE Forms subscriber, get access to. So a lot going on. There is a lot of code involved in various places, but a lot less code than it would be if you didn't have the token framework to work with. So here are a few other things that you can do with tokens. And some of these we just showed. You can allow non-authenticated users to participate securely in specific eForms transactions. We did that. You can enable invitation-driven self-provisioning so that non-authenticated users can set up their own user IDs. We did that too. That they had to be invited though. They had to have a token that was generated by someone who already had access to the system. That could be generated by a batch process. It could be sent out to thousands of people at once. It could also be sent out to people who already have user IDs and just invite them to participate in one specific business process. So for that kind of thing, it also provides custom row and transaction level security to data. So you can link a parent to a particular student form or to a particular student ID. You could also use it, for example, to link employees to their supervisor so that when they fill out a review form, only their supervisor can access it. You can, any place where existing security hierarchies don't match, you could use a token to fill that in and create a link between any two pieces of data or more. You can use it to do email-based approvals. So you click on an approve link, and that's got its own token, a deny link that has its own token, recycle link has its own token, and it knows, that link knows who it was sent to, and therefore it knows who clicked on the link and what action they took and what form they took action on. All that can happen without them ever having to log into PeopleSoft in order to accomplish that. You can create email links that expire after a specified amount of time, that either for security reasons or to maintain currency. You can send out links that have a life cycle. You can also use it to daisy chain different form types. So you could have a notification that gets kicked off by one form type, and it has a link that has a token in it, and that token has data tied to it, and that data is from the first form. But then by by following that token, by clicking that link, the token knows where to go, and it has the information necessary to start off that second form and to pre-populate it with information. You could also use it for certain form actions, to allow certain form actions to take place outside of firewalls or two-factor authentication restrictions. So you might say, you know what, the main reason we have two-factor authentication is to keep people from getting into our personal data table. But we want people to be able to get to their own information really quickly. And so we want that to just be behind one-factor authentication. And so you could use these to give you a link, a kind of a passport, again, like we showed, to get into that information and authenticate it at the transaction level without having to go through as many security protocols as you use to protect your core data. Just a few of the things that you could use the token technology to accomplish. So all of this is delivered as part of GTE Forms, and many of you are already GTE Forms customers and have access to this. Again, the token information is in our new release that we just released this last week of GTE Forms 3.30. If you are a GTE Forms subscriber, you already have access to that. As soon as you get it installed, you can get access to that configure token goodness. If you don't have GTE Forms, we recommend that you take a look, of course. It is a bolt-on to PeopleSoft that allows you to create custom fluid applications. The page building can be done without developers. You can also have business analysts create dynamic forms, logic statements, and conditional behavior, and create their own workflow, their own routing. All sorts of features are within the grasp of functional users, allowing you to get the biggest bang from your PeopleSoft buck without burdening your IT professionals to build out these custom self-service applications in electronic forms. And of course, it's fluid-based, or can be fluid-based if you choose, allowing you to deliver those forms on mobile devices, as we saw during our demo. So
Paul,
a
we
few
got a
additional
question.
features. Yes,
If I can jump in.
please.
This is a bit of a two-parter. What is the time or effort estimate to implement tokens with a GTE form to enable invitation-driven self-service provisioning so a non-authenticated user can set up their own user ID?
Time frame, well, since we have already done it, it's definitely going to be more straightforward. I think that a couple of weeks of time to implement is probably a conservative estimate. Again, it depends on what else you have going on. But if you're just talking about, we've already have the form and we're just looking to involve someone else in it, a week to 2 weeks, I would say, is what I would be looking for. Might be able to get it done faster.
Okay. Second part of this, do you make your token demo process flow document accessible to customers, or a guide for customers to follow to set up a form on their own?
We're happy to publish that, yes. So I don't know if that demo document is on the hub yet, but or if that process flow is on the hub, but we can definitely put it out there. If you'll just get in touch with us, we will make sure that you can get access to it.
Very good. Thank you. That's it for now.
Okay. And that is mostly what we have prepared for you. So I will wait for a few minutes, see if anyone else has any additional questions who would like
We
to
just had another one come
throw
in.
in. Okay.
What happens to user ID that gets created for external participants? Can it be used in the future?
Yes, it can be used in the future. It can also be purged if you choose to. So that user ID uh, is now in the system, and we have a token tied to it. So the token is, in this case, giving access to particular information. Otherwise, that user ID can't see anything. So we've created the user ID. We've given the user ID just the access they need to be able to access the information we want them to see. Now that they have it, they can use it to log into the self-service layer of PeopleSoft and access whatever information we've given them. We've given them security to see. So yes, and it can be information other than token-based security. You could give them access to other standard self-service information depending on what kind of ID you're creating. And yes, that user ID can live as long as it needs to.
Okay, now they're coming in. Is the user ID stored in PSOP or DEFN like a normal PeopleSoft ID?
In this case, it is, yes. And this is just one approach to involving external participants. You can use pseudo IDs, kind of like Candidate Gateway does, where Candidate Gateway never actually creates a user ID. They just authenticate using their email address. And so again, it's kind of a pseudo ID. They're actually, to PeopleSoft, according to PeopleSoft, they're signed in as the guest user, but the application knows who they are because of their email address and password that they've created. And we can do similar things. The advantage of creating the user ID that's in PSOP or DEFN is that AWE workflow then knows who it is. So you don't have, we can keep track of alternative IDs in GTE Forms, but AWE would just be storing that it was the guest user that did all of these things. And so that's why my preferred approach for AWE-based transactions like this one is to actually create a PSOP or DEFN user ID for them.
Does it involve creating the user profile and assigning a role?
Yes, but all of that happened automatically. So we used again, some of our own tech. Let me back up a couple of slides here let's see, somewhere in here, we actually generated a new user ID, and again, we can let them set their own password, but yeah, so we use some of our own tech to create a copy of a template parent user ID that already had the permission list that we want them to have. And using that copied ID, which we then give them control of, they now have access to whatever permission list we wanted them to have access to, and only that.
And I think that, what does it take to purge those user IDs?
It's basically just a script that you can run to, first, of course, the script needs to identify what population you want to purge, and then just delete them from the appropriate tables. There are just a few tables that you need to purge from. You can also, if you want, you can just inactivate them. Either way, user IDs are free. And you can have as many of them as you want. But yeah, if you want to clean them out, it's not a difficult process to remove them.
Great, thank you. So Paul, you had mentioned earlier, obviously there's a lot of this, this is a popular application with financial aid forms. So
right.
You were talking about parental access. There's a really good business case for this.
Mm-hmm.
So the other things that we've talked about, I think at the beginning you had mentioned vendors. So
mm-hmm.
Any other external participants that you want to engage in these kinds of workflow-enabled activities.
Right.
Another interesting one that clients have asked about is enabling physicians and clinics to participate in FMLA requests.
Mm-hmm.
So there's typically a need for either a physician to upload a document and approve an FMLA request, verifying the details of that request.
Right.
That would also be a very unique opportunity, a very interesting opportunity to explore with this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If other people on the phone have things that you guys have questions on, different business cases, by all means, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to explore those things with you. We're always excited to hear how people are thinking of using these kinds of technologies. So we certainly encourage it.
Yeah, the FMLA request is a great example where, and again, a place where reusing the user ID is a good thing. You specify, you have in the FMLA request, and you select the doctor. If they're existing, if we already know that we have that doctor and that doctor already has an ID, then you can route to them. And if they don't, then you can route them through the self-provisioning approach. And in just a couple of clicks, they'll have an ID and have access to only the forms that have been routed to them specifically, and be able to attach those that additional documentation. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun to actually have this. We've laid it out theoretically for clients for years. Here's how we could do this. I got tired of laying it out theoretically and wanted to build it. And it has been great to have, and it's opening up all sorts of possibilities and ways to integrate with external systems and to integrate again with external participants. So thanks again for joining.
Paul,
and,
one more question before you go.
You bet.
Is the token-based approach the only way to implement this type of functionality with the GTE Forms framework?
Is it the only way? I would never say that something is the only way. There are certainly other ways that you can do it. For example, I mean, there are just a lot of different ways that you could do it. You can have non-token based self-provisioning, and we've done that for many years, where you actually self-provision and then you need to provide information that we already have in order to get to the transaction that matters. We've done that with I-9 and E-Verify for years. So yeah, tokens are not the only way to do it. The tokens are just very flexible and allow you to create another level of security and reduces the amount of development necessary in order to implement stuff that involves other people.
And one additional one that just came in, can you provide an overview of the security aspects of this so that we can share it with our security team?
Yes, the best way to do that, if you get in touch with us, we actually have I included a couple of pages or slides from it here, but we have a public portal security PowerPoint that walks through both the reasons that you can use public portals and how to set them up securely. So we can share that, and we can also answer any additional questions they have directly. But yeah, that's probably the best resource to pass on to security people.
And would you mind flipping to the last slide with the contact information on it?
The one with your name on it? Oh, there you go.
You bet. So if anybody does have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Happy to help.
Wonderful.
So Paul, any closing comments?
Nope, that's great. Thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate your interest.
Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye, everybody.